Again, if you're a guest, we want to say welcome home. We're glad you're here. If you're joining us online, glad that you're joining us. You're listening to our podcast. I love that you're, through the power of technology, able to worship God with us. But I just want to say something from my heart for those of you who are watching online. I hope someday you can make it in this room. We love you. We love that you're joining us here. But whatever that is, if it's a distance or if it's a barrier, if you're maybe hesitant about the health situations, I just pray that would overcome and that at some point you could come in here and join us in the room because there's some amazing people in this room. So for those of you in the room, thank you for being here. I love you guys. It's been great to see you. We've been in a series called Real Friendships. And we've been talking about how we all desire to have real friends in our lives. Those authentic people that we can have relationships with because life is difficult. And when life becomes hard, we want to have people around us who love us and support us. And the first week we talked about building a real friendship, and I have my building blocks here again for the last week to share that up. If you missed that online, go to our website, yankton.church, our YouTube channel, watch those messages, and I pray that as we do that, that's a resource for you. That's the purpose of that, to kind of have a library where you can go back and see or learn and remember, and maybe if you missed it or weren't able to attend, you can go back and watch that. But that week, we learned about a phrase that we've been saying together every week, and it's going to be back here on the screen behind me. I'd like us to read this out loud again one more time as we wrap up this series, this phrase on friendship. I went out looking for a friend, but none could be found. I went out to be a friend, and they were everywhere. And that's the heart of this series, church. Every single one of us desire to have friendships, but then we need to ask ourselves, are we being a friend? How do we love other people? How do we show them friendship? Because that's really how we make lasting friends. And that second week, we talked about making healthy friends. We talked about, if you remember, how relationships can have highs and they can have lows. And how do we walk through those moments when things are tough, when things are rough? And I gave you 3 keys to remember to do that. Again, go back and watch that if you weren't here. And last week, we talked about making lasting friendship, lifelong friendships, friends to the end, forever friends that we all desire. And I gave you 6 C's to remember about making a lasting friend. And again, if you weren't here, the last one was to be committed to Jesus. And that's really the first one. That's the foundation. All of our friendships, if we want to have committed friendships, we need to be committed to Jesus. See, it always starts with my relationship here first. This is never the problem, church. This is always the problem. I made this statement to you. I said, I'm not committed to my marriage. I'm not committed to my relationship with Elaine. I'm committed to my relationship to Jesus. And because of my commitment of my relationship to Jesus, of course, then I'm committed to my relationship with Elaine. And it's the same for her. She's committed to the relationship with Jesus. So if there's problems in our marriage, the problem's not between us. There's something missing here. And that's what we need to get right, church. We need to have committed hearts to Jesus Christ. Settle this question first, and then this will take care of the rest. And so today, as we wrap up, we're going to talk about one big piece of friendships. And I think this is so fundamentally important. And last week I said, I hope you can come because I was kind of teasing you. I said, this is kind of the one big thing you want to make it to. So if you're here, welcome back. We're glad that you're here. If you're watching online, it's going to be really good as we talk about what it means to be a friend. And this message, the first time I heard this message was about 10 years ago. And there's a pastor by the name of Andy Stanley. I heard him preach this message, and I was just moved by it. There's probably 3 or 4 messages that I've heard in my life that it just impacted my heart so much. And hopefully you've had that experience too as well. Maybe some of you here. Okay, but this one here is it's just a really good one that impacts me. And it shocks about the word, and our word today is going to focus on the word love. And here's what I would contend. I don't think we truly understand what love means. We talk about love all the time, right? We talk about, oh, I love my wife, I love my husband. We talk about, I love my son, I love my daughter. If you're me, I talk about, I love the Minnesota Twins, okay? I love the Dallas Cowboys, maybe. I don't know why you would do that. I hope you find Jesus if you do that, but no. I love God. I love my church. I love food. I love this food. I love this shirt. I came to Cheers last night and I had their pasta. Oh my goodness, it's so good. I love their pasta, right? And that's a shameless commercial again. Yes, it is. All right, come and eat this pie. It's good. It's good food. But we talk about that word love so many times that I think we forget what it actually means. I think we live in a culture that doesn't really understand what love is. And just to bring it home to our series, love is the key to every relationship. including your friendships. Love is a big part of your friendships. And I'm going to speak to the guys in the room, my brothers that are in the room today, okay? And I speak to you sometimes because I am one. And men, can we just be honest? We need a lot more help, okay? And I got no amens from the women, so either that's true or you're scared. All right. Do guys need more help? Okay, thank you, women. Okay, we need some help. And I'm just going to use this as an example. The word I love you to guys, it kind of makes us uncomfortable. And if you don't believe me, go to one of your buddy friends and look at him and say, I love you. Okay, he might punch you. He might get a little awkward, okay? It's uncomfortable for God. I remember the first time a friend of mine looked at me and told me he loved me. I'm like, I don't know how I feel about that. Why is that? And I'm going to say it. Don't miss this, church. We don't understand love. If we truly understood love, that wouldn't make us uncomfortable. We wouldn't have a problem with that. So we're going to talk about what is actually love. So if you got your Bibles, I want you to turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. If you do not have a Bible, that's okay. We love you. We'd like to get you a Bible. Just write on your connection card. We'll get you a Bible. If you're online, email us. The other thing we always recommend is YouVersion. It's a free app available on any smartphone or device. It has every translation of the Bible. It'll even read it to you. You can download it right now. That's okay to do in church. But we just want you to have God's Word. And in fact, on my phone, YouVersion is right there on that little bottom bar, like the favorites thing. And it's not because I'm a pastor. It's because it matters. Because I need to be in God's Word too. And God's Word should be important because it's going to change your life. And if we want to understand love, and culture and society is going to tell us all kinds of things about what love is and what it isn't, how about we actually look at the source? And that's God's Word. So as you're going to 1 Corinthians 13, I'm going to tell you a little history of this passage before we unpack it. It was written by a guy named Paul. We talked about Paul a lot. Paul was a church planner like me. And he would go to all these church communities in the first century around Asia and Europe, and he would plant these churches. And one of the churches that he planted was in a town called Corinth. And he loved this church, and he would write letters to these churches that he planted. This is before cell phones, before emails. He had to write letters. And we save these letters, and they become what we now call our New Testament. Well, Paul actually wrote to the church at Corinth more than any other church. Now, you can read into that a couple different ways, right? Either they really needed the help, or he really loved them. I'm not sure which one it was. Maybe it was a little both. But this letter from the Corinths is what we call our letter, our book of 1 Corinthians. And just to give you some context about the culture at that time, they lived in the Greek culture. Remember, Greek and Roman times, they had a lot of gods and a lot of goddesses. And so they're familiar with gods and goddesses. You might learn to that in school. And one of the things, their gods and goddesses were more human than they were divine. What I mean by that is they had emotions, they had feelings. These gods didn't really care about the people. They just kind of cared about themselves and what was convenient for them. And the people were told that these gods were kind of moody and kind of unstable. And so they would have to make sacrifices to these gods to kind of please these gods, to kind of make sure these gods were appeased. And so I've got to live my life wondering how this God feels about me. And if the God is angry, I've got to do something to make this God feel better again. Does that sound like any relationships in your life? Just mine, right? Okay, no, but that's true. That's what they saw as gods. And Paul wanted to help them with something. Paul wanted to introduce them to the God of the universe, that all those other gods were not like. A God that actually really cares for every single person. A God that loves you. A God that's not bound by human emotion. He's bound by the love that he has for you. And the other thing Paul needed these people to understand in Corinth, there was nothing they could do to earn this God's favor. They could do all the sacrifices they wanted to, but that wouldn't change this God's love for them and how much he loved them. And so that's the challenge that Paul had. And so Paul wrote this letter to help them understand that. And we come to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Now, if you're familiar with the Bible, and even if you're not, you've probably heard of 1 Corinthians 13. It's commonly called the love chapter. I've been to so many weddings. I've performed some weddings. Almost every wedding, they talk about 1 Corinthians 13, and they share it. And I think that's okay because we apply it to, it talks about love. But I think we don't understand this passage. We're going to spend some time on this because really, I don't think we understand love. And does it apply to marriage? Absolutely. But I don't think it just applies to marriage. I think it applies to all of our relationships. And if you really want to boil it down, the heart of what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ is love. And how do we love? And so before we get to the text, I need you to understand something about language. We've talked about words before. Words are important. And our Bible, the New Testament, when Paul wrote this to the Corinths, it was written in Greek. Now, in Greek, you need to understand, when they wrote the word love, they never just wrote the word love. There was actually 3 Greek words that meant the word love. And you may have heard these words before. They're kind of familiar. The first one is philios. Philios means a brotherly love. You probably heard of the city of Philadelphia. They call it the city of what? Brotherly love. That's why they call it that, philios. That's kind of the brotherly love. The second word, Greek word about love, is the word called eros. You probably heard this word in the word erotic. It's the same word. It's kind of a romantic love. So there's a brotherly love and there's a romantic love. But here's what I want you to not miss, church, as we read this passage. When Paul was writing this, he didn't use either one of those words. He didn't use the word brotherly love. He didn't use the word eros for romantic love. He used the third Greek word, and that word is agape. And you might have heard this called before. Agape is the purest form of love you could have. Ultimate love. If you're a Princess Bride fan, you could call it true love. That's the word Paul used to understand this. And so here's what we want to do. When you understand love in this context, it changes everything, including our friendships. So with that, let's go ahead and look at 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 1. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gifts of prophecy and can fathom all the mysteries and all knowledge and have a faith that can move mountains, but I do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give my body over to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Now, can I just simplify those 3 verses for you? Well, this is what Paul's saying. You can say anything, you can know everything, you can give everything. But if you don't have love, it's a waste of time. Love is the key to everything. It doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what you give. Without love, can I just say it? It's all worthless. Love is a big deal. And this passage that Paul's going to write now is one of the most beautiful descriptions of love anywhere in literature, but I would contend it's one of the best parts about the Bible, which is why it's used in so many weddings. And so Paul is going to go on in verse 4 to tell us about love. So Paul, what is love? What is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me no more. Anybody? Okay. Verse 4. What is love? Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no records of wrong. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. And now, I think as we read that passage, as we go along with Paul, we can kind of agree on that. We can look at that and we can say, yes, that does sound like what love should be. That's what love should be, Paul. Paul, love should be patient. Paul, love should be kind. I agree with that. Love should be humble. Love should put the other person first. It should honor the other person. Love should be forgiving. Love should be truthful. Yes, Paul, we agree with all that. That is a beautiful picture of love. And then we come to verse 7. And Paul makes a statement in verse 7. He makes 4 statements about love. And I'm going to read it and then we're going to unpack it. This is verse 7. Love always protects. It always trusts. It always hopes. It always perseveres. Now, there's something very important that's going on in this language that we need to talk about. Paul is using a Greek word called pas. Look at somebody and say, pas. See, you just learned Greek today. Good job. Okay? Pas is the Greek word translated. It means always. Okay? It means everything. So always. So Paul uses the word pas, and then he uses 4 other Greek words. He says, always this, always this. And the best translation is what we just read here, I believe. It always protects. It always trusts. It always hopes. It always perseveres. That's what love means. Love does all 4 of those things. And now, if you're with me, this is what you might be thinking. Except for, I don't experience that sometimes. When I think of love, I don't always think of it always protecting, always trusting, always hoping, always persevering. Because we've had some experiences in our life where love hasn't done those things. And if you've lived life long enough, you've had some love that has been hurting. And in fact, I would go back to say that there's another philosophy on love, the band Nazareth, called Love Hurts, Love Scars, Love Wounds, and Marks. Come on, anybody know? Love hurts. Sing it with me, church. Ooh, ooh, love hurts. And it does. See, when we think about love, when we have our expectations for love, that's what we'd like it to be. We'd like it to be patient. We'd like it to be kind. But when we experience it, can we just be honest? There's a gap between what we expect out of love and what we experience. And so we're going to unpack what that means. How do we do that? How can we make love always protect, always trust, always hope, always persevere? And in order to do that, I want to take you to, there's a study that was done by Marcus Buckingham. He wrote a book about it called The One Thing You Need to Know. Okay? And in this book, Marcus Buckingham did a very interesting thing. He referred to a study where there was 105 couples with the average relationship was at least 10 years. Okay, so these are couples that have been together for quite a while, at least 10 years, some of them a lot longer than that. And what they did was they rated each other on their level of happiness and qualities about their partner. So every person, they said, okay, how satisfied are you with your relationship? And then they gave them a list of categories to rank their partner. And they divided this study into two camps. Again, 105 people, 10 years relationship. This is a pretty intense study. And this is what they did. They looked first at the couples that said they were unhappy. I've been in this relationship at least 10 years and was not satisfied with this relationship. Okay, so they looked at them first. And of the couples that said, we're not really satisfied with our relationship, this is what they found. When they rated their partners, as you can probably imagine, they rated them pretty low. They're unhappy with their partner. There's things about their partner they're not satisfied with. They don't like what they see in their partners. If I could just say it again, their expectation didn't meet their experience. There was a gap between those two things, and they were unhappy. Now, this is the part where I'm going with this. They looked at the unhappy couples first, and then they looked at the couples that said they were satisfied, that they were happy in their relationship. And this is what I don't want you to miss, church. They had an assumption. They said, okay, if the people that are unsatisfied, if they have these, they rate their partner pretty low, what we're guessing is, their assumption was, the couples that say we're satisfied, that say that we're happy together, what they probably do is they probably just lowered their expectations. There's a gap. So they're just like, I know he's lazy. I know he doesn't clean their, but that's okay. I'm just okay with that. That's what the assumption was. That what they did in order to be happy in a relationship, all you've got to do is just lower your expectations and go with that. But this is what I don't want you to miss, church. What they found was the exact opposite. Here's what they found. They found that the couples that were the happiest consistently rated their partner higher than the partner rated themselves. Now here's what I mean by that. This is a direct quote from the study. The happiest couples rated their partner more positively in every category than their partner rated themselves. And this is their statement. They had an unrealistic positive view of the person they loved. Think about that. They had an unrealistic view of the person they loved. If I could just simplify it for you, they thought more of that person thought of themselves. And that didn't make any sense to this study. They're like, what does that mean? And this was their conclusion. Don't miss this, church. When there is a gap between what you expect and what you experience, this is what this study recommends. And this is the one thing you need to get out of today, so make sure you pay attention to this. When there is a gap between what you expect and what you experience, find the most generous explanation for the other person's behavior and believe it. Find the most generous explanation for the other person's behavior and believe it. To which all of us would say, yeah, right. That doesn't make any sense, but it does when you think about it. Think about back to when you first fell in love. And for those of you who are married, or maybe you've been married before, think about when you first met that person and you were just all gaga and goo-goo over them, right? You couldn't get enough of them. You want to be around them all the time. They're so perfect. They're so awesome. They're so great. And there were things, can we be honest? There were some things that you were like, I don't know about this, but you would find this great explanation for it. And maybe some of you had friends, like you'd be like, oh, I found this guy, he's so perfect, he's so dreamy. And they're like, yeah, but he hasn't had a job in like 3 months, And you'd be like, well, but he's had, and you make excuses for it, don't you? Or if it's a guy, you find these ways to make excuses. But what happens is that flips, right? over time, those things that you see, those gaps that you see, they grow wider and wider, don't they? Or maybe you have the thought that some people have, well, I'll just change them. Now, I don't like this part about them, but I'll get them and I'll change them. How many of you know it's kind of an impossible thing to do, amen? It's hard to get somebody to change. But that's what we do. We have a gap between what we expect and what we experience. But I want to go back to the study because this is an interesting concept. They call it an upward spiral of love. Remember these couples that are happy. This is what they found. When they made that decision, when they believed the best in the other person, this is what they developed. They developed a conviction about that person. That person is better than what they think of themselves, and that's my conviction. That conviction led to security in the relationship. The relationship felt secure. Because of that security, there was high levels of trust, and whenever there is high levels of trust, it creates the word intimacy. And intimacy is the foundational emotion that all humans want to get to. Here's my definition of intimacy. Intimacy is to be fully known and fully loved. And you can apply that not just to a romantic relationship, church. You can apply that to a friendship, can't you? Every single person, and that goes back to the heart of this series, wants to be fully known and fully loved. And you get there by finding that intimacy. Look at 1 John 4:18. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. We all have a desire, and every man, woman, and child you'll ever meet have a desire to be fully known and fully loved, but we are afraid because we don't trust, because of what we see and what we experience. And anytime, church, there's a gap between what you expect and what you experience, here's the key. You get to decide. Every single relationship you're in, there's going to be a gap at some point. There's going to be a gap between what you expect and what you experience. And when you do that, you have two choices. They're going to be on the screen behind me. You can either believe the best or you can assume the worst. Every time there's a gap between what you expect and what you experience, you have a choice to make. You can either believe the best or you can assume the worst. And here's where we're going with this, just so you know. What love says, what Paul says here, in order to love, to really love somebody, it means I'm going to choose to believe the best. It means I'm going to always protect. I'm going to always trust. I'm going to always hope. I'm going to always persevere. That's what we need to do in love. Now, before we go on, I have to stop here and say, again, yeah, right, Pastor. Because if we had time, you can stand up here with your microphone, Pastor, and you can tell me. But if we had time, we could go around this room, we could pass around the microphone, and you could tell me your story about how this didn't happen in your life and the hurts and the pains. And please hear this. I'm not here to diminish any of that. I know that can be a hard thing to do. And so to help you understand this idea, because I'm telling you this is so fundamental, not only to our friendships, not only to our marriages, but also to our relationship with God, to truly understand God and this concept of love, there are really two obstacles that get in the way. So if you got your note sheets, you're going to want to write these down if you haven't been writing down already. But the back side of this note sheet is blank. There's a reason for that. You want to write this down. Here's the first one. This is the first obstacle to believing the best in any relationship: their past actions. The person that you're with, their past actions are one of the biggest obstacles for you to believe the best. And again, this makes sense if you think about it. They disappointed me the last time, Pastor. This happened, and it happened, and I was disappointed. And it happened the last time. It happened the time before that. It happened the time before that. I have been disappointed by this person in the past. Because if we're honest, we judge people based on their past actions. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That's kind of a survival tactic that we have. And we learn this is somebody I can trust or this is somebody I can't trust. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But here's what I wanted to help you understand. The problem with judging somebody based solely on their past actions is it can keep us from their future. It can rob us of future relationships. Some of you maybe have friendships that you had that maybe you haven't seen for a couple years. Maybe those friendships or relationships ended poorly. And over the course of the last 2, 3, 4, maybe 5, maybe 10 years, this is the assumption you made. That person hasn't grown at all. Think of how hard that is. Maybe over the course of that time, maybe that person has grown a little bit. Maybe they have learned. We can't let somebody's past actions be the sole judgment for our future relationship with them. And go back to verse 7 again. Love always protects. It always trusts. It always hopes. It always perseveres. And if I can just be honest with you guys, that's what we want, isn't it? Every single one of us in this room would admit that we screw up sometimes. We fail. We don't meet that expectation. There's an expectation, and we don't meet that with our experience. And yet, when that happens from us, that's what we want, right? We want the person to trust us. We want that person to believe in us. We want that person to have hope for us. We want that person not to give up on us. And church, that's what God's saying. In love, in a relationship, when there's that gap, we need to make sure we're not letting their past actions keep us from future growth. Now, I've got to say something here before we move on because it's very important. I am not saying that means you excuse or avoid difficult conversations. Please hear that. There's a myth that says because I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, I need to lay down and be a doormat and just let anybody walk over me. That is the furthest thing from the truth, and I would say that's the furthest thing from love. In fact, love compels us to have those conversations. Love compels us to kind of push in at times, but this is where the difference is, and this is key. Don't miss this. When you go into that conversation with that person, keep love at the center. Always keep love at the center of those conversations. We need to have those conversations because sometimes there's some unhealthy things that happen we need to address. But when you go into that, make sure you keep love at the center of this conversation. I'm going to give you a really safe example of this, okay? And this is just a made-up scenario. But let's just pretend you met somebody and you said, hey, I'd like to spend some time with you. So maybe you set up a time, let's say 5 o'clock on Tuesday, we're going to meet at Hy-Vee and we're going to have coffee together. We're going to get to know each other. Okay, great. That would be awesome, okay? So now you've set an expectation. See where I'm going with this? Okay? You get to Hy-Vee, you show up about 5 minutes early, you kind of stand there and you wait. No call, no text. It gets to be about 5 o'clock, and you're like, oh, maybe they're running late. Maybe what's going on? It gets to be about 5:05, 5:10, 5:15. Some of you are out the door before that, right? But some of you would sit around waiting for like a half an hour thinking maybe, okay, we just set an expectation, right? Tuesday, 5 o'clock, we're going to be at Hy-Vee, and your experience was not that. Now, here's what sometimes we do in our mind. We go negative, don't we? Oh, I bet they just blew me off. I bet they didn't even want to meet with me to begin with. I bet something else is so much more important than I. You see where we're going with that? Do you see how that's going the other direction? You know what love does? Love always assumes the best. We're going to believe the best about this person. Maybe they forgot. Maybe something came up. I'm going to see. Maybe I'm going to call them. Maybe I'm going to be the one to text them, hey, everything okay? See where I'm going with that? That's how we can believe the best. And what I found, a couple things that are important to talk about here. Sometimes people have blind spots. We've talked about this already. Sometimes people are just kind of like irresponsible with their time. Can we agree? and every one of us, if you have people who love you, have maybe had somebody in your life pull you aside and say, hey, listen, I was really looking forward to when we were getting together at 5. And when I didn't hear from you, like I was worried about you. I wasn't sure. Is everything okay? We need to have those conversations. And we need to help our friends. We talked about it 2 weeks ago about being candid, right? Sometimes we're nice. Somebody will say, oh, I'm sorry, I missed you. And we'll say this, oh, that's okay. But it's not. You know what that's called? That's called a lie. And you know what we need to say in that? I appreciate you saying that. And help me understand what happened here. Do you see the difference between those two things? You're saying it's not okay. Yeah, like I was expecting that we were going to meet together. I was looking forward to that. And now my experience is here. Let's talk about that. Let's work through that. And here's how I've done this in my life. I learned this trick a while ago. And if it's helpful, great. If not, throw it out. But I've been a supervisor for probably 15 years. Almost every job I've had, I've been a supervisor role. And I learned this very early on in my career. It's called the rule of 3. Okay? And here's what it is. Like the first time stuff happens. Like say somebody calls in sick. Okay? Hey, I'm sick today. Okay, that happens. Okay? First time just kind of happens. Second time it happens, now you're looking at a pattern, right? And I'm seeing a pattern. I might say something, I might not. But definitely by the third time, now you see a problem. And that's kind of how I do this in my life too. Because we can agree, life happens, right? Stuff comes up. People have things come up. They're not able to meet that. But I'm going to always remember to believe the best in this person. And then if it happens again, we might have that conversation. But definitely on the third time, I'm going to sit down with them and say, hey, is everything okay? Is there a reason? And you know what I found more often than not? There usually is. But it's usually not the reason that I think. I always want to make it about me. I don't know how you feel, but I always want to make it personal and take it personal. But a lot of times there's something going on in that person's heart that they need to work through and see that. So that's how we believe. So first obstacle, to believe in the best is the person's experience. Here's number 2. The second obstacle we have to overcome to believe the best is my past experiences. The first one is the other person's past experiences, the history that they have made with you. Now we're talking about my own past experiences. So this is going to be a little interactive. So I need you guys to participate. If you're watching online, participate too. I know it's weird, but God can see you. So I'd like a show of hands in the room. How many people have ever been lied to? Somebody has told you a lie. Okay, good. That's ever. Okay, you keep them up. Keep them up. How many of you have ever been lied about? Somebody told something to somebody else about you that wasn't true. Okay, look around the room. Okay, now, how many of you have ever been rejected before? Okay, look around the room. How many of you have ever been gossiped about before? All right, I think we hit 100% on all that. Good job. Okay, you guys put your hands down now. So here's what I want to say. 2 things about that. First one is, it hurts, doesn't it? It does. It hurts inside. And that hurt doesn't just go away. It can stay with you. It can infect you. But here's the second thing you need to understand. Sometimes those hurts can make us defensive. And it can start impacting us without us even knowing about it. And if we're not careful, our past hurts can rob our current relationships. See, there's certain actions or words that somebody might say or do that might trigger you because of a past hurt, and you might not even be aware of it. That's why I always counsel couples who are on their second marriage to be very, very, very careful. Because in a second marriage, it is so easy to go back to that first marriage. And the same hurt and the same pain that you had in your first marriage, you bring it into your second marriage. And this person now is trying to live up to an expectation they don't have any clue. They're playing a game they don't even know the rules to because of this past hurt in their life. See, that is what can happen with our past. Our past can be a very dangerous thing, and it can keep us from positive relationships. And we can start to assume intentions. We can start to assume, oh, because you did this, you really meant that. Instead of actually finding out what's going on, we go to the worst. We assume the worst instead of believe the best. And the word that we talk about is the word suspicion. Suspicion is a very, very dangerous thing. Because what can happen with suspicion is it can turn into a self-fulfilling prophecy. How many of you know if you're looking for a problem, you will find one? Okay? I'll just use our church. If you're looking for problems in our church, you'll find them. They're here, okay? I'll even point some out to you because I know all of them. But if you're looking for it, you'll find it. And that's what suspicion can do. It can fuel that. And look at what 1 Corinthians 13:6. We've read this before, but we're going to look back at it again. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. What is the truth? What's actually happening here? And sometimes that's hard to see. Sometimes we have to dig deep and find that out. Sometimes it's things we don't even understand. But here's what I want you to know. Love is not trying to catch the other person doing something wrong. If you're in a relationship with somebody and you're just looking for them to do something wrong, that's not love. Love is not trying to build a case against them. I'm not going to keep a file cabinet with all these things that you've done wrong, and then I'm going to pull it out, and I'm going to slam you over the head with it. That is not love. Love is not keeping score. Love is not, okay, I've done 4 for you, now you owe me 4, and I ain't going to do 5 for you until I get all 4 met. That is not love. Because that is what we want to do, and then we make ourselves the focus. See, a lot of times, an obstacle to believing the best is my own past experiences. So church, again, one more time. Every single time there's a gap between what you expect and what you experience, you get to decide what you put in that gap. Am I going to choose to believe the best, or am I going to choose to assume the worst? And before we wrap up, I always have to say this too. There are certain relationships where you have to put up some boundaries. We have to agree on that. If you're being physically or emotionally abused, please don't read this as me saying that that's okay. It's never okay. Okay, sometimes in certain relationships, you do need to put up some healthy boundaries to say that. But here's what I am going to say. Make sure that you're always, always, always going in prayer. You're always going in counseling. And the third thing is recognizing, again, where the other person is at spiritually. Somebody who is physically or emotionally abusive is not where they need to be with God. Can we agree on that? And so the best thing you can do for that person is to continue to pray for them. Does that mean you have to be around them and be their friend? No, absolutely not. You need to make sure that. But what I'm saying is for the majority of the time, when we're interacting with people, when we're interacting with relationships, when there is a gap, in church there will be a gap between what we expect and what we experience, we're going to choose to believe the best. We're going to always protect. We're going to always trust. We're going to always hope. We're going to always persevere because that's what we want too. Because we're going to blow it. We're going to miss out. We need to have that too. And if you're still kind of pushing against that, which is okay, I like that if that's all right. But I want to just propose this question to you. What's the alternative? Okay? So let's pretend we're going to take that. What's the alternative? So instead of always protecting, always trusting, always hoping, always persevering, let's delight in uncovering mistakes. Every time somebody screws up, just point it out. Show them how bad. Look at every mistake they make and just point it out to them. How about thrive on suspicion, right? Just always wait for them to do something wrong. Always be reading into stuff. Always be looking wrong for it. Assume the worst and embrace doubt. How's that sound for a relationship? Sound like any fun? No, it's miserable. But a lot of times, if we're being honest, that's why we're not in relationships with people. It's sometimes easier to avoid people and avoid relationships so I don't have to get hurt again. Because I've been hurt before by other people. And my own past and my own experiences has made it difficult. And that's the biggest barrier to being in relationships. And church, that's what the enemy likes. He wants us to stay away. He wants us to avoid those relationships. He wants us to always live in suspicion. He always wants us to remember the past hurts and blame the past. And my God says, listen, if you guys want to know what love is, that's what love is. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. Love always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. And the rest of that verse, it's not on the screen, but that kind of love never fails. That's the kind of love that Paul was describing for the people in Corinth. It's an unconditional love. It's a love that means I love you. I don't need anything from you. I'm not here for you. I'm here to serve and I'm here to love. And that kind of love builds trust like we talked about. And that trust leads to an intimacy. At least it's a security that builds to trust, that builds to an intimacy where you can say, I can be fully known and I can be fully loved. I can share with you deep and hurtful things that have happened in my life, and I know that you're going to protect me. I know that you're not going anywhere. I know that you're going to have hope. And that's the kind of love that changes things. And you'll find this, church, I found this in my own life. You'll have situations that come up with people, and if you take this approach, I'm telling you because I've seen it, if you decide that you're going to believe the best in the situation, you're not going to assume the worst, you're going to learn something. You're going to learn something about that person. And you're going to find out some information, and you say, okay, and that's going to help you to continue to love that person. How many of you know when you find out more information about somebody, it kind of helps you love them a little bit more, doesn't it? I've had conversations with people that have told me things, and they've said, Pastor, I've never told anybody this in my entire life. And they'll share that with me. Do you think that just happens like that? Trust. It takes time. It takes intimacy. And when I hear those things and I hear people say those things to me, then I understand, okay, now I see this person completely differently, don't you? Because you know that there's a hurt and a pain that they're dealing with every single day. And they want to have that. They want to share that because they want to be in relationships with others because that's how God designed us to do that. So church, one more time, and this will be on the screen. When there's a gap between what you expect and what you experience, are you going to believe the best? Or are you going to assume the worst? Where do you go? Because it's going to happen in your marriage. Where do you go at work when that coworker does that thing again after you told them for the 15th time not to do that? Okay? They're going to do it again. Where are you going to go immediately in your mind? Are you going to assume the worst or are you going to believe the best? Where are you going to go when your kids do the same thing over and over again? Are you going to believe the best or are you going to assume the worst? Because if we choose, as Paul says, to really love people, love always protects. It always trusts. It always hopes. It always perseveres. That kind of love never fails. God, again, I get to this part, and I realize it's really easy for me to stand up here with a microphone and say this stuff. But in a second, I'm going to have to put this microphone down, and I'm going to go after there, and I'm going to have to live it out. That's where it gets hard. But God, I am so grateful for this amazing group of people that are in this room, that we can walk through this together. God, we're not going to get it right. We're just going to admit that to you right now. And God, in our hearts right now, if there's any pride that says, oh, I've got this thing figured out, forgive us of that, God. Because we don't have it figured out. on our best days, we're frail and helpless and we're stumbling about, and we need you. So Jesus, I'm going to ask that if there's anybody in this room or anybody who's listening online who has not settled that question in their heart, they would do that right now. Because we can't be in relationships with each other until we settle the question with you first. And that we're going to commit our lives to you, God. Because, God, you've always believed the best in me. Even when I was far from you, even when I was doing my own thing and living far away from me, you saw me standing here preaching this message. And you said, I'm going to love that guy because I think someday he's going to actually do something for our kingdom. God, forgive me when I write people off. When I look at them and I say, oh, because of this or because of that, there's no good. I can't do anything with them anymore. God, you don't see people that way. You see them with love. You see them with hope. And you haven't given up on anyone yet. Far be it from me or anyone else to give up on them. And God, I pray for those right now who might be listening who are in unhealthy relationships. Maybe there is abuse going on. Maybe there is emotional abuse that's going on. God, I pray that you would protect them. I pray that you would give them the courage to speak up and say something and put those healthy boundaries in place to protect themselves. And God, I pray that as a church we would come alongside them and support them in whatever way we can, give them the resources and counseling they might need. But God, I pray for those hearts that they wouldn't become hard, that they just wouldn't write people off because of the hurt that they've experienced. God, I pray that you would soften those hearts so that we could understand love. We live in a culture that throws that word around like it's garbage. And love is the fundamental principle of what it means to be a follower of you, Jesus. You said in your word that you are love because you so loved the world. You said that you can't say, I love God and hate my brother because you can't even see God. You can't say that you love God unless you love the brother that's in front of you. But God, I'm just going to admit that it's sometimes hard to love people. There's some people that are just hard to love. And in those moments, God, I pray for patience. I pray for wisdom. I pray that you would hold our tongues in those times when we need to. But God, I pray the other side of it too. I pray that there are those times that we do speak up, that we do have a conversation in love and point out and say, you know what, that wasn't okay. And it really hurt me when. And I just want to let you know that going forward, I would appreciate it if you would. Those can be hard conversations, God, but they're needed. Because that's what it means to be love. It means to grow. God, we all have blind spots. We all have areas in our life that we don't see, but being on the other side of me, you can see it pretty easy. So again, I ask for the humility that we would have those conversations. And when they're had with us, we would be open to hearing what was being said. And God, I just feel in my spirit right now that there's maybe some time here that we need to just go to you in prayer quietly. So if you're in this room or you're watching online, I'm just going to give you 60 seconds just to kind of do some business with God right now. Listen to what he's telling you. Maybe there's a name, maybe there's a situation you need to think about, but let's just take some time to lift this up to God. Jesus, on the night you were betrayed, you said the world will know that you are my disciples by how you love one another. So God, I pray for a sense of unity and a sense of purpose as the church here, that we would be united as one in love, and that love would bind us all together in perfect harmony. Thank you, Jesus. We ask you in Jesus' name, amen.